Hi, I'm Sarah Hall, Chief Curator and Director of Collections at the Frick Pittsburgh. And I thought it would be a fun thing to take a mental trip back to the Frick Art Museum, which we all miss right now, and take a look at some highlights of the 18th century French collection. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and I have a PowerPoint, and pull that up and say goodbye visually, but I'm still here with you vocally. And we're going to take a look. And I called this French Confections, although not everything we're looking at is confectionery in nature. That's a reminder to me to tell you that one of the pleasures of experiencing this from home is that you can have a glass of wine or a cup of coffee or a piece of cake, which you can't do when you're in the galleries. So do that if you want to. I have a cup of tea with me. So you might not be able to admire the physical qualities of the artwork quite the way you can when you see it in person, but you will get some nice details to look at here, and I think some new context for when you are able to return to the galleries. So I thought I should share an image of the gallery to set the stage for tonight's talk. You can see why we call it the Green Gallery. Opened in October 1970, it has always been the stage for the museum's 18th century French paintings. The walls are covered in Florentine silk velvet, and three chandeliers sparkle above, and we have the beautiful parquet floor as well. It is just the perfect setting for the 18th century French painting collection, which Helen Clay Frick assembled in the late 1960s and early 1970s as she was building the Frick Art Museum. So our chronology starts around 1728, and we're going to look at some fêtes and pastorals first. And I will be honest with you, a lot of visitors breeze by the Rococo paintings, and I think they don't connect as well to modern sensibilities as some other artworks. So when I'm in the galleries, I often ask people to stop and consider who owned these paintings. Where might they have been displayed? And that results in a sort of aha moment as people imagine French aristocrats in the decades leading up to the revolution. Suddenly, the context of these paintings becomes more clear. Here we're looking at a relatively small painting. It's absolutely scaled for decorating to someone's domestic space. It's light, romantic, and I think to our eyes, probably artificial feeling. These two young lovers, look how beautiful they are. She has a basket of flowers and he's helping arrange them in her headband while she's examining the results in a little hand mirror. His work is connected to a new type of genre painting that gained popularity in 18th century France. And so we're going to pop out of the Frick and into the Louvre for a moment. And you'll notice that this painting is a decade earlier. The Lancret was 1728. This is 1717. And this was when this painting was submitted to the Académie Royale, they were faced with a new kind of painting. So Watteau in this Voyage to Cythera, you see all of these beautifully dressed couples. They're all couples. They're all engaged in, and I'm sorry that this isn't larger so you can't see the details as well, but I didn't want to spend too much time on this, just enough to give you some context. It's these couples, they're all sort of romantically flirting. There's a big, our historical debate of, are they going down the hill to get on the boat, or are they coming back and leaving? They've been to this island that's off in the background, and the boat is very, very fancy here with Cupid on it and draped with, red draperies. I personally think they're on their way down to the boat, but it is a debate. Anyway, that's not important to our conversation here. It's important is what kind of painting is this? It has elements of landscape painting. There are elements of genre painting here, paintings of everyday life, and elements of popular theater also reflected here. And so this kind of painting became known as a fête galante, and they typically feature beautifully costumed figures in these idyllic landscapes. And Nicolas Lancret, who we just saw, and Jean-Baptiste Pater, who we're going to look at in a moment, are perhaps the best well-known, or best known and best followers of Watteau's style. So here we're looking at the young lovers in a landscape again, which, if you want to see the landscape, and then the young lovers, it displays all the charm and sort of frothiness associated with the Rococo. They're kind of doll-like, and they appear kind of theatrical and artificial. For me, it's almost like a performance of romance as the boy places the flower in her hair. Lancret was known for his drawing skills, and Pater, who we're going to look at right now, was known for his color. And Pater studied with Watteau and was from his hometown. And this gorgeous sense of color was really what his reputation was built on. But in this painting, he comes very, very close to Watteau with these beautiful, refined figures in their satin. And he has this delicate touch about him. Look at the uh, ornament in her hair and that glassware that's has some kind of wine, I'm suspecting, being poured in it, although it seems empty. And the color of his costume in particular, that fellow on the left with his combos of two shades of pink and that pale yellow, are really exquisite. These small scale paintings like these, they're made for the apartments and private collections of the wealthy. The subjects, which do seem, I think, contrived to us, had many references in their sophisticated yet restrictive social world of garden parties, theatrical entertainments, and balls. The secularization of painting, which had largely begun in the prior century, we think of the Dutch Golden Age and the painting, the rise of landscape, still life, and genre painting. This is kind of like genre painting for aristocrats, about aristocrats. And so these Rococo artists are making paintings that complement the sensual and worldly taste of the aristocratic class. Now let's reorient ourselves in the gallery for a moment. I'm turning to Boucher next, and you can see that that's the very large painting at the right in the center of the wall. And I just wanted you to get a sense of the scale. It's far larger than the two pieces we just looked at. And there's the whole painting. When I look at this and consider the landscape, I always think of Boucher's complaint, quote, "Nature is too green and badly lit." He had absolutely no problems making improvements. He was one of the most successful artists of the period, and in his career, which spans most of the 18th century, he rose to prominence when he was quite young. He was a favorite of Madame de Pompadour, the mistress of Louis XV. The Rococo style reaches its peak between 1745, when she is named official mistress to the king, and her death in 1764. And that really is sort of, the arc of the peak of Boucher's career as well. He really rides the crest of the Rococo. One of his first artistic undertakings was making prints after Watteau, and it's like he ingests that vocabulary of love and landscape and then carries that boldly forward with this different kind of overt physicality and this kind of muscular energy. So Peasant Boy Fishing, what we're looking at here, is a large decorative panel from a cycle that had at least 3 other paintings. The original owner is uncertain, but the paintings were likely made for the salon of a private residence. We know that the Chrysler Museum has one of the group, and there are 2 others in the Metropolitan Museum of Art's collection that went together to form an ensemble. Boucher was named first painter to the king in 1765, a prestigious post within the administration of the monarchy. When I'm with people in the gallery and we talk about this painting, I often ask them to look closely and think about a few things, like who are these people, and where are they, what are they doing, does it seem realistic? And they're not hard questions, but they get us talking about this idealization of country life, of the folks who are doing the hard work and labor of the land. And here they look extremely healthy and vigorous, and there isn't really a sense of any deprivation at all in this painting. And so I asked, what are they doing? So he's fishing. And is he a successful fisherman? Well, look at that. He has a really big basket full of fish there. And if we think of that fishing as a metaphor, we can suspect that if she hasn't already been caught, the young lady with the picnic, she will very soon be caught, because he's either been there a very long time, or he is just reeling those fish in one after another after another. She is so lovely with her packed picnic, and there's a bottle of wine in the corner. Everything in this scene is actually, the bloom of youth and good health, and there's really no sense, as I mentioned before, of poverty. I wanted to read another quote from Boucher. Her figure is up here on the screen. "We must not think of a woman's body as a covering for bones," which kind of always makes me want to laugh. "It should not be fat, though it should certainly be rounded. It should be firm and slender without thereby appearing to be thin." So he definitely has this idea of wanting to present women, this kind of soft, sensual, sort of curvaceous and fleshy and very Rococo image of femininity. Here, I think this is really interesting. There is this one little trace of sort of poverty in the entire painting, which is her tattered hem. One little trace of imperfection in this country scene, and her tattered hem is exactly where he has signed the painting. So I think it's maybe hard to read here, but I think it's very interesting. Boucher was appointed first painter to the king after the death of Karl van Loo. Van Loo, some people say because of his Dutch heritage, some people say Van Loo. He's represented in our collection by this sophisticated allegory, The Arts and Supplication. It was commissioned by Madame de Pompadour's brother, the Marquis de Marigny. He was the Minister of Arts under Louis XV, and he commissioned it during his sister's final illness. Van Loo was a versatile and prolific artist who tackled many types of painting. He was from a family of artists, and he won the Prix de Rome as a young man, traveling to Italy with his uncle, two nephews, and Boucher. I love thinking about them all heading over to Italy together. This lush, dramatic canvas depicts the various arts, there at the bottom on the ground, imploring fate not to cut the thread of Madame de Pompadour's life. It dramatically illustrates the importance of her patronage to the arts. And here we see those arts all beseeching, just down on their knees, begging fate not to end her life. Absolutely devastated, actually. Look at the folks in the bottom left who have their heads in their hands, and the fellow on the right who's just recoiling. And here you see the dramatic moment where the line of her life is just about to be severed. Rococo furnishings also reflected an interest in beauty and fantasy, like the parlor organ by Jean-Pierre Latz and Francois Duhamel in our collection. Born in Germany, Latz moved to Paris around 1720, and by 1738, he was named privileged cabinet maker to the king. As an ébéniste, he specialized in working with wood veneers and intricate marquetry, which you can see on this lid. It's been lifted up so some light transmits through it, and you can kind of see the marquetry there. His business prospered throughout the 1740s. His work in true Rococo style rarely exhibits straight lines. Instead, there are graceful contours, flowing curves, and counter curves. It's possible that this organ may have been made for one of his regular patrons, Marie-Louise Elizabeth, who was the daughter of King Louis XV and Queen Marie Leczinska, who is also portrayed in this room in a portrait by Jean-Marc Nattier. So we're going to take a look at that. Nattier's portrait of the queen is distinctive for its lack of grandiosity. From a family of artists and aspiring to greatness as a history painter, he actually ends up making a name for himself as a portraitist. And he's responsible for portraying most of the women associated with Louis XV's court. His subjects are typically depicted draped in classical robes and sumptuous settings, but this portrait of the queen in informal dress is unusual and probably quite reflective of her personality. She was devoted to her children and religious observance. She was several years older than her husband Louis, and although she had 10 children, his mistresses, Madame de Pompadour and Madame du Barry, are more familiar names to us today. Look how lovely she is. Isn't this beautiful? Everything is sort of soft, but the black lace and the white lace surrounding her face have both been rendered really precisely and delicately. And that expressive look in her eyes really connects with the viewer. There's a tiny little glisten of moisture that also adds this marvelous infusion of life, which is a good segue to our next section, which is focusing on faces of the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment was an intellectual movement of wide and revolutionary impact. Enlightenment thinkers sought to explain the world and its contents through the application of rational and secular thinking. It spurred the inquiries of professional and amateur scientists and ensured that philosophy and politics were revisited with a modern, reasoned approach. The Enlightenment gave voice to the ideas that created both the American and French revolutions, and as people began to reconsider ideas of government, work, and family life in relation to modern life, new subjects became relevant to artists, and perhaps more importantly, the public. Jean-Antoine Houdon has been called the sculptor of the Enlightenment because he's responsible for portrait busts of some of the most important thinkers of the day, a pantheon of famous men from Voltaire to Benjamin Franklin. His portraits are renowned for their lifelike quality. He seems to catch a flicker of personality and lively intellect. And in our example, it's lovely because we see not statesmen or men of fame, but instead his wife. And I've been told, and you can tell, I think this is very true, how difficult it is for a sculptor to convey a smile like that, to get that little bit of teeth showing, and unusual. And here is his daughter, Claudine, really lovely. She also has that sense of flickering intellect, I think. Even though she's a baby, she has this inquisitive look on her face. Like Houdon, Maurice Quentin de la Tour created vivid and compelling images of notable members of 18th century society. He was a virtuoso of the pastel portrait, and here his subject is Charles-Marie de la Condamine, a scientist who was part of a pioneering expedition to South America to take measurements for use in calculating the circumference of the globe. That's all. Condamine was also a believer in the theory behind vaccination and advocated research into early methods of vaccinating against smallpox. De la Tour was described by Enlightenment philosophers, so we're talking about de la Tour now, the artist. He was described by Diderot, the philosopher and the compiler of the Encyclopedia, as a kind of magician able to capture the living presence of his subject. Family life was valued at this time during the Enlightenment as the genesis of moral instruction and a center of personal happiness. A well-organized, peaceful, and ordered family life benefited all of society. Arranged marriages start to go out of fashion, and as the idea of marrying for love and companionship becomes accepted, there's a new sort of interest in depicting these ordinary family interactions. And so this genre painting by Nicolas Bernard Lépicier is a really sweet example of that kind of value placed on simple family moments. Now we're going to look at, we've looked at faces. Now we're going to look at, the kinds of things that might surround these people had they the means. And I think most of those that we've looked at, excepting maybe our last mom, do have the means to have these things. This pair of ewers by Pierre Gautier represents water and wine, and they're the earliest documented works by Gautier. The handle on the wine vessel, which is on the left, is in the form of a fawn or a satyr, and the shoulder of that bottle is festooned with decorative sparkling swags of grapes. They're really lovely little clusters of grapes, and you can see that his little hooved feet, and he's kneeling on a goat's head. So there's goat's heads on each side of that. And so this all kind of connects to Bacchus and the joys of wine. And the water vessel on the right bears the figure of a mermaid and grotesque and fanciful sea monsters with gaping mouths where the goats are on the other ewer. There's documentation that suggests that Louis XV's mistress, Madame du Barry, who was a patron of Gautier's, also owned a pair of ewers representing water and wine by him, although we don't know if they were in the same form. And I love this detail of the mermaid where you see her beautiful figure and how the transition from the skin to the fish scales for her tail, I think, is pretty beautifully done. Some of the finest furniture ever made was produced under the guild system of 18th century France. Ébéniste worked with a wide variety of woods to create dazzling marquetry, which we really saw on the parlor organ that we've already looked at. But the mounts for the furniture, which we see a few here, were cast in bronze and gilded. And meant for candlelit interiors, the polished wood surfaces and the gilding and these different colors of wood, because when fresh cut, often the wood used in the marquetry and for the tables had pinker tones to it or more yellow tones to it, and really complemented the palette of the Rococo paintings, and it would all really glow and sparkle by candlelight. After 1765 is when, whoops, sorry, I moved that forward too fast. Martin Carlin became especially known for furniture that was decorated with Sèvres porcelain, which you see here. The sides of it have these 28 square Sèvres porcelain plaques hand painted with bouquets of flowers. It has tapered hexagonal legs, and it's a classic example of this. A classic example of the neoclassical. I could have done better than that, but it is a balanced neoclassical style, these tapered hexagonal legs, and we have pulled it out, and we've opened it up to let you see it a little bit, and you can see on the pull-out writing sections that the green leather would have been bright and would have matched the porcelain. So the top is aged and darkened over the last couple of centuries. We also have another piece. This is attributed to Carlin by Ted Dell, who was an expert in French furniture, 18th century French furniture. We have a second piece by Carlin, a small candelabra table, also in the gallery. His wealthy patrons, so these are really specialized pieces of furniture, and some of Carlin's pieces actually are mechanical or had secret compartments and things. So his patrons didn't come to his lower middle class neighborhood to buy this extraordinary furniture. Instead, his works were sold by an intermediary called a marchand mercier, who was essentially a dealer in luxury goods. Now we can look at the Georges Jacob chair. He also specializes in the neoclassical style, which as the century progresses, gradually supplants Rococo. Marie Antoinette was a fan of the simpler, more symmetrical neoclassical style. You see here these fluted tapered legs on the chair, and it's, there are straight lines actually in here, and it is a kind of solid feeling chair. The really wonderful little secret about this chair, and we have a pair of them, is that underneath there is a paper label that says Meuble de Couronne, furniture of the crown. It was made, these chairs were made for the Palace at Saint-Cloud, which was magnificently positioned on a hill overlooking the Seine, and it was purchased by Louis XVI as a retreat for Marie Antoinette and the children. Now, I thought this would be a really good painting to end with, given what we just looked at. This now takes us into the 19th century, and this is the Seine at Saint-Cloud. So it's now a residential suburb of Paris, on a hill overlooking the left bank of the river. But you can look towards the back of this painting at the top of the hill, center left or left of center. There is the palace. It's surrounded by a beautiful landscape, 970-acre park. It was built in 1752 in addition to being the place where the queen hung out with her children, it was also a residence of Napoleon, who declared himself emperor there while residing there in 1804. Later, Napoleon III uses it as a residence. It was destroyed by fire in a siege of Paris in 1870. But de Marne, the artist who painted this, died in 1829. So it was completely in existence in his lifetime and when this painting was made. And what I thought was really nice about using this to conclude is that we can see that palace up there on the hill, and we can imagine, thanks to the things we just looked at, we can imagine the lifestyle that's going on in that palace. But perhaps it's the folks in the foreground that we feel more of a connection to, who are leading their relatively ordinary lives of varying levels of comfort. So I think, you know, there are some people here who are working harder than others, and we have a couple of maybe the rising middle class or bourgeoisie who are sitting on a bench at the right. She has a pair of sort of opera glasses, and she's admiring the boats on the river and looking at the scenery. And I think this kind of puts things in a little bit of perspective for us in terms of the Rococo style and perhaps the way we relate to it. I'm going to stop doing the screen share now and be back. Hi. And say thanks a lot for listening to this presentation on the 18th century French collection. I hope that very soon you'll be able to go to the museum and take a look at the paintings and the furniture that I just talked about and have a new appreciation for them, but also see the other things, because I didn't at all cover the entire collection in that gallery. So with this context, maybe you can go forth and enjoy the 18th century a bit more. Thank you.